Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sayorius, and today we're going to be taking a look at Kagurabachi Chapter 2, Heaps. Kagurabachi is a new manga that recently dropped, and I will be covering a new chapter weekly. So if you want to stay updated, please consider clicking that subscribe button and hitting the notification bell. On to the chapter. The first thing we see is a continuation of the fight with Chihiro and Chiba, and they're fighting the Yakuza, or the politicians and the Yakuza. I guess it gets a little bit muddied there, but anyways, there's a fight that ensues, and what ends up happening is they end up killing basically all the Yakuza people, and what's left is their boss. And so they're now trying to have the boss cough up all this information about the small elite group of sorcerers, or what they like to call, and this is the term they drop, the Hishaku. Now, when they're questioning, and this always happens in these types of stories when you're trying to get information out of someone who is very much expendable for the main enemy force, you know things aren't going to end well, and that's exactly what happens. What it does reinforce, though, is that this world has spells with conditions too, in addition, of course, to what the spells in terms of fighting. So when he tries to reveal sort of more information about this group, of course he dies in the most brutal way possible, the most gory way. Visually it looks striking. I love it. I do love the story trope when someone screams, "Get out of the way!" before a huge explosion goes off. They did it in Demon Slayer during the Entertainment District arc, and they did it here where sort of this big explosion of just chaos and craziness happens. So that was pretty cool as well. There's just nothing more beyond this point, at least with the big fight, other than the fact that they saved the revolutionary person. I don't remember from the first chapter if they dropped his name or not. All I know that he's part of the anti-mafia group that was trying to get the mafia kicked out of the city. Or not mafia, Yakuza. I mean, it's interchangeable, I guess. The Yakuza out of the city. So based on how much they're showing of him, they could give him a bigger role in the story, and he could be more of like a sidekick along for the ride. There just has to be a point because they saved him, or they could definitely not, but that's just my speculation at this point. But I will say we shouldn't get our hopes up, because once we get later in the chapter we don't really see him as much, so probably he's just more of a one-off character. But yeah, I think that just concludes everything from just them attacking the mafia, because then we get a flashback, of course, of sort of what happened during this time skip and why so many things have happened. And we get sort of a lot of motivation, specifically with the enchanted blade. And this is where I think the story takes a turn for when it actually adds a lot of lore that you weren't really given in the first chapter, as to not freak you out. This was more lore dump in terms of sort of what the kind of man his father was and what he had created, with sort of his workshop and forging these swords. And the first instance you see something is sort of different about this swordsmith is the fact that he has a magical barrier around his house, and when it's activated he calls on his friend who is part of the war effort. So Chiba comes over because he's alerted that something has happened, and he shows up to a scene with Chihiro over his father's body, basically already dead. And when Chihiro is basically recounting what happened before he blacked out, it's basically described that there are 3 sorcerers, which I don't know about you, but I got a lot of JoJo vibes from this scene, from part 2, you know, the Pillarmen, where it's like the 3 figures. I just kind of get that vibe where it's just like, oh yeah, you have the 3 most powerful people that you're after, both with varying degrees of just being so insanely overpowered for the story's sake. And I think this is just giving more motivation to sort of pursuing this. Now, will these be sort of the end game villains of this story? They could definitely be, or they could be serving a bigger, greater boss with sort of bigger efforts going in. I could definitely see this going both ways, and personally I think that basically showing these 3 individuals it could mean that the story ends when you beat all three of them. When you kill all three of them, the story will end. That's what I personally think. So based on how long they want to keep running the story, they can face a bunch of smaller grunts here on the run, sort of being like chapter 1 has been, where he just wipes out a lot of the Yakuza members. And then it's sort of later on he starts beating it, like kind of like Demon Slayer in a sense, where it's like, the upper moons, you don't really get them until much later. You have to get through the grunts first, and then you get like the upper echelon of the most powerful villains. But we get more sort of just motivation for him trying to stop them. But then you also learn about sort of like the villain's motivation, like why they attacked him specifically, why they killed his father. And this is where it gets interesting. You get talk of 6 enchanted blades. Now, what's really interesting about this is that it was sent out to help the war effort, but right when the war ended, his father believed that there shouldn't be any, like these weapons shouldn't exist anymore on the battlefield because there's no reason for them to exist. So he found all of them and took them back and then locked them away. So the fact that the sorcerers now want these enchanted blades, do they have sorcerers who can use swords now in addition to their magic? Is that why they're so overpowered? Who knows? That's yet to be seen. But it's given me a lot of excitement to see where the story heads from here. Specifically with these 6 swords, how they also look visually. And then we get the big plot twist where his father, up until his death, was making another sword. And this 7th blade was one that he gifted Chihiro. Now, we saw this in action last chapter, but to actually get sort of him wielding one of the 7 enchanted blades, there's only 7 that exist within this world, is really cool. And I want to see him fight these other enchanted blades because I want to see what kind of potential they have and what kind of powers they have and why they differ from the 7th blade. But also, it's later pointed out by Shiba that he hasn't unlocked his full potential yet. And I think that's really cool because it just, I don't know, it just gives you more excitement because you're like, how cool are these swords gonna look when they're fully realized in their most powerful, like the most powerful form. I mean, it's a common story trope, but I love it to death. It happens in Bleach, it happens in One Piece, where there's like sort of gears or levels that these characters go through, and the more powerful they become, the cooler they look. And it's physical transformations that I dig, absolutely. We get sort of the goldfish once again. We get Chihiro sort of breaking down, crying, asking why this happened. Very similar to Tanjiro and Demon Slayer, of course. And then we also get him eventually arriving in Tokyo, trying to figure out all these answers to the questions he has regarding the sorcerers, the swords, why anyone would do something so horribly. Or not so, it's not someone doing something so horribly, someone doing something so horrible. And this is where the story ends, with them in Tokyo and them talking about how they found a lead to the sorcerers. So they're going to go pursue these 6 swords that are missing and try and get them back from these sorcerers. And so far, I think this is actually a more interesting premise than just having this be a typical revenge story. The 6 swords definitely provides more motivation, plus more excitement to know what type of powers they are. I mean, that was the biggest driving factor, in my opinion, for Demon Slayer, was the fact that all these upper moons, all these demons had different levels of powers, and the way their powers worked were very different from each other, both visually and also like power wise. Some of them were more offensive while others were primarily defensive, like you saw in Swordsmith arc. And I just love that. I think just having that variation really adds a lot to a story, and gets you more excited than just saying, oh, we're just going to kill a bunch of guys. We're going to kill a bunch of guys to get back these 6 swords that have magical abilities, while these other people have magical abilities with my magical abilities. You know, it's like adding more layers to a very simple revenge story. And so far, I think that this is a great start. these first few chapters did the job for me in terms of hooking me into the story. I want to continue reading this story. Unlike a certain My Hero Academia that has really fallen off, I think the story has a lot of potential. It's really shaping up to be a solid hit, and all he needs to do is continue doing what he's doing and pacing himself the way he is, because I think the pacing is on point. The flashbacks aren't too jarring. It really is feeding into each other, and I think the more that they take time with these characters, the more that we learn about them and sort of his journey as into how serious he is now, as opposed to how he was earlier, where he was much more sensitive, much more of a crybaby. I want to see sort of that transition too, and hopefully we'll get more flashbacks throughout the story too, to sort of flesh out his character even more. But that's it for today's video. Let me know what you guys think of this recent chapter. Did you guys love it? Did you guys hate it? I want to hear all your thoughts in the comments below. You guys really killed that last video, and I am very thankful for that. So if you hit that like button, it'll let me know that you want to keep seeing more of this type of content. That's it for me. Thanks for watching, friends. I don't know how to end it. Sayorius out.